So, thank you, Karin, for this huge introduction, which at the very start makes me shake and, and afraid of what I'll be talking about. And I'd like to thank Karin, Robert, and the center for having me here, and the Polish side, the university, Stanisław Witecki, for arranging this and asking me to present this. This is a topic which I have been studying quite a long time ago, and I tend to return to it and go back again. But the main study for this was done back in the 80s, which was quite a long time ago. And like I said, it keeps coming back. As the first thing, I have an interesting quote which I love when I think about me working on the almanacs. Of necessity, an old almanac, merely as an almanac, must be a very dull book. That's about any ephemeral document once it has fulfilled the period for which it was written, whether a day, month, or a year, has very little interest at a later period. This is a quote from Eustace Bosanquet, early 17th century almanacs from 1930. Is this indeed so? Well, if this was so, no one would be looking into those little documents. In fact, there are more and more studies being published on this, and they depend very much on the country. They depend very much on the period. I asked myself how to study almanacs, what to study about them, and what would be interesting in them to sort of counter what Bosanquet wrote, 80 years ago, almost 100 years ago. The first thing that comes to mind just simply as prints. Study them as something that came out of the printing house and was distributed and was sold. What is the format? Where is it published? How many copies? Whether it's continued the following year? That's the simplest way. But you can study the various contents and what do they carry? What message do they carry? And finally, the third thing, which I have not done myself practically at all, is how they're used by the owners. Now, recalling Bosanquet, this third part is the most answering to what he wrote, because indeed, if you are looking for those prints which people were using, then we ourselves usually use a calendar and throw it away. Well, I don't, but my wife hates me for that. But normally people put down that they have a meeting here, they have a dinner with someone, and then they just throw it away. And that's why they are very, very hard to find. My study was initiated in Oxford, in the Bodleian, and they have a number of those almanacs, which are bound, usually 10 or 15 of them together. Some of them have inscriptions. They usually don't go year after year. It's a random collection. Someone simply collected them and put them together, and they're available there. When I ran out of the almanacs at the Bodleian, I started looking for them, and I went to the Lambeth Palace Library. And that's where they have, for this period which I was studying, practically all of them. From 1604, that was my study, till 1640, they have practically the full set, with the exception of the year 611. God knows what happened. Maybe a dog got hold of it and ate it, or maybe it's somewhere behind the shelves. And what is interesting is they have practically all of them. Many of them, well, maybe not many, but some of them were never cut. I was the first person in the 80s who was cutting them. So obviously those were prints which were sent over for censorship to get permission to print them. Since we have Polish and English almanacs, because I did a little bit of research, less in Poland than in England, I sort of made a bit of a comparison between them. My research, and what I'm going to talk about mostly, is for early Stuart England, 1603, 1604 till 1640. And I'll explain this in a few minutes. This is the time when the monopoly of Company of Stationers was introduced, and practically of those almanacs which I used, which I read, must have been over 500 of them. 3 or 4 were printed at the two universities, Oxford and Cambridge, the rest London and Company of Stationers. as a huge, so basically you're getting similar type of material all the time. They're all same format, little books, and they are really produced in huge numbers. We don't have the numbers for the first half of the 17th century, but the first numbers we have for after restoration, and we're talking about 400,000 copies per year. So it's it indeed, and thinking about printers, sellers, and people who gave money for this, you wouldn't produce that much if it didn't sell. So in other words, they went out there and they did have some kind of impact on people who purchased them. And the people had to pay money for this, and they paid for something. They were looking for something in them. And that was really something that made me interested in this. Why people were using them? What were they looking for in them? In Poland, the situation is for a researcher more difficult. First of all, there is absolutely no monopoly. Whoever wanted, if they could prepare one, they could publish it. The places which I was able to track was, of course, Kraków, Poznań, but Gdańsk also, Lubecz, Wiśnicz, Wilno, Wrocław. Sizes vary. From the ones just like the English ones, you have twice as big and even bigger. So they do differ. And also, Janik, who has studied the 18th century one, he basically assumes that there were about 40,000 copies sold for the period from 1500 till mid-17th century. So we're talking about a much smaller volume, which probably didn't go to as many people. And we do have cases when, well, you can't really tell whether the same person was not able to buy one or not. I was not able to track down any sort of bundle of Polish almanacs which would be left intact, I don't know, for not censorship, but someone just simply collected them. So it creates a slightly different situation in Poland than in England. In terms of the merits of what was in them, they are very similar, especially for this period about which I'm talking about, because I decided to do it for the first half of the, well, even less for the early Stuart period. 1603 is the moment when we start getting a very big production. The company of stationers indeed controls this, and they are done the same way. Very often some of the figures and some are being printed from one to another. Authors usually do it for several years, and very often some things are being repeated. 6040, that's the beginning of the Civil War. And printing houses are, in fact, taken over by people who print propaganda. I could give another lecture on pamphlets which tell about plots, which were published in 1641, and there were about 100 of them. And in that year, there were, I think, 5 almanacs only. So it is reasonable to take this part. Then, of course, they are very similar for the whole period. There is censorship, of course. There's nothing sort of spectacular about them. When you move on to the later period, yes, you do get more interesting things. You do get some political things and so on. Okay, well, the 3 most important prints in English language about the almanacs. The first book written by Bernard Kapp, published in 1979. He sort of overlooked the whole production of almanacs in the early modern period, and he basically wrote what they were. So it's like, the basic look at them, and you write a book. It's sort of braced by a recent publication by Phoebe Jensen. She does it in a very similar way, but she goes into details. She's trying to determine whether the astronomical information which is there is real, is valid, and so on and so on. But it's a bit of an analysis of a print as a print. In the meantime, Louis Kurth wrote a book about medicine in almanacs. And this is going a different way, basically analysis of what kind of medical advice was presented in those almanacs. And that's exactly the idea I had. When I found out she wrote the book, I said, oh, it's just too bad I didn't translate my book into English back in the early 90s. In Poland, we had a couple of books as well. Those are the three, plus the last one is the one that I wrote. Again, the first one on the left by Bogdan Rok, quite early, very similar to Bernard Kapp. Basically, he analyzed the 18th century almanacs. The two others, Maciejanic, again, extremely technical book. Fantastic if you want to learn who printed them, what kind of prints they used, and so on and so on. Well, this one is also similar, but it's for the 17th century. If you want to go into what they were passing on, well, there are more and more articles appearing, not in English, in Polish. So, you know, the question of forecast of weather, medicine. There are also historians who do it regionally. So there's something for Karin. There's a guy in Gdańsk who is studying Prussian almanacs. And his book should, I don't know. He's writing it as his habilitatia, so it might be out any moment right now. But it's, of course, it's different than Polish because they're in German. So it's a different genre than the Polish ones. As far as a study of inscriptions, well, we have very little of this in Poland. In English, in English language, we have a little bit more. This guy is actually the leader, Adam Smith from Oxford. In this work, autobiography, one of the chapters is practically based on almanacs. But to do this, you need to be extremely lucky. In other words, you need to get hold of a bundle of sources, documents from one person who was not throwing away his almanacs, but was writing everything about his life. And you need luck for this. There are works of this type about travel, for example. There could be probably quite an interesting book written about medicine, because I myself found in those almanacs inscriptions which show that the author was probably a doctor who was writing down the date of birth, and based on this deciding how to cure the owner of the almanac. But that's my guess. That's my guess. I'm not sure about this. In Poland, we have practically only the ones with inscriptions. Actually, Adam Smith, in one of his works, writes that the almanacs he consulted, every seventh one has inscriptions. So 1 out of 7. I'm not sure if he went to Lambeth Palace Library or not, because there they don't have inscriptions. Even I didn't write in them. So, in Polish ones, we have inscriptions. The majority of them remain anonymous, but 2 of them, Jan Sobieski and his sister, Katarzyna Radziwiłł, we know of 2 almanacs of each in which they left inscriptions. John Sobieski, 1666 and 1679. The 2 almanacs are held in the Czartoryski Library. One of her almanacs is in the Jagiellonian University Library. The second one is anonymous. It's in the Czartoryski Library, but when I compared the 2 of them, I have no doubts that it's hers. Now, what is interesting about this? The interesting thing is, and I have a big question mark here. They are from a noble family, of course, one of the biggest families in Poland at that time. Before he became the king. And my question is, did they have almanacs for every year or not? Well, they were probably lost if they had them. There's one almanac which is in the Czartoryski Museum, in the Czartoryski Library, which is quite interesting because it is for a certain year, but it has inscriptions for 3 following years. Of course, you can't make any sense out of this because those are not inscriptions telling that there was a comet or somebody started a war. But it's like sometimes 2, sometimes 3, and you have no way of telling that under this date this is for the 1st, 2nd, 3rd year. Obviously, someone got an almanac, was using it to put down some notes, didn't have the one for the following year, didn't have the one for, again, why? You can ask me, I can ask you, we have no way of knowing. That's a homework for Karin. How many almanacs did you find in the papers of Bogusław? No, but I mean, this is the one that we have left by Katarzyna Radziwiłł. there, I mean, this everyday things. My husband went to Warsaw to attend the Sejm, the parliament. So I would be, well, maybe one information in there is interesting, and you can find it in other places. We would really have to have, in her 1661, 1664, probably she had one for 62, 63. It would be nice to have all of them and follow somehow. So, in other words, we are left with a lot of question marks. Plus, of course, there are a lot in Polish libraries which have inscriptions, but we have no idea who wrote them. So it's guessing. Unless you have some very concrete information saying that my husband such and such went to the parliament and so on and so on, you can try to determine who was a deputy at that moment. And well, I don't think too many people would be interested in it this way. My interests were small, little, short booklets published in England, a company of stationers. You have here the measurements. It's 10 centimeters. They consisted of two booklets. The first one was the Almanac. The second one was the prognostication, always bound together, usually about 32 pages. And they were very often repeated year after year. This is the statistics. For the first period, first 10 years, 16 to 1610, you have 69 of them. I'm talking about the authors. For the second period, 138. And then what is significant here after 1640 to 1649, you have only 17 of them. So it shows that, yes, there was a market. There was a need for this. There were more and more authors. If you have 20 of them for 10 years, that means every year there were about 10 different ones. They didn't differ that much, but there was a market. There were people writing them, printing them. People were buying them. And then everything collapsed with the beginning of the Cold War because the printing house was needed for something else completely. The total of around 600, and like I said, I read about 500 of them till 1640. So what was I looking for them? One of the most important things is, in fact, this is an almanac written by Brown for 1624. One of the most important things is right here. They differ. On the front page, they usually tell who is the author, or he is a person of letters or something of this type, and so on and so on. This is normal things which you find in booklets published at that time. But this sentence here is very important. Astra regunt homines et regit astra Deus. And going through them, I have a conviction that this is what they were used for, and this is the way that people, normal people who had access to them, who were told that such a thing existed, somebody in the village was able to read and read it aloud as the others were sitting around. Somebody was telling about planets, about health, about husbandry. But since we're talking about thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, I have a strong conviction that people really took it themselves. They all, of course, believed in God. It's not important whether this was a Catholic God or Protestant God. This changed in the meantime. But God was ruling the planets. The planets were ruling people. Astra regunt homines. That's what is really in those almanacs. And that's what I find extremely fascinating. Of course, not the question of how the planets are based one against another. Because, sorry, I think planets have influence on us, but I don't think we can tell how. In those years, they were calculating this and telling what can be done in which moment, and they took it very seriously. We call it astrology, but that's exactly what you find in them. Here's one from the Bodleian with the inscriptions. I don't have the one which I looked at where somebody was calculating the dates and the various aspects of planets and so on. All of them had this figure at the very beginning of the calendar, the anatomy of man's body, as the parts thereof are governed by the 12 signs of the zodiac. The graphics themselves differed from one almanac to another, but we're ruled by the universe. It's the planets, it's the signs of zodiac, it's the stars which determine what we can and what we can't do, what we should do. That's from an almanac by Bretnor, 1618. Now, we can, of course, try to say how precise they were in calculating the movement of planets. But I don't think that's necessary. It won't tell us anything whether they were right or wrong. People simply believed in this. People simply believed in this. And there's one interesting thing connected with this in one of the almanacs. And I can't tell you at the moment which one. The author says that the most precise calculations were done by Copernicus. That's the only positive word you can tell about Copernicus in the almanacs. And then he calculates everything about this. The world is designed to be a perfect. It's this part. It's this part right here. A short view of astronomy to give satisfaction to the vulgar. The world is designed to be a perfect and unite composition of all things, a divine work but unite, around with all kinds of forms and shapes of bodies, which are in all parts procreated and do appear, and all flesh created by God, as well in earth as in heaven, by his only word of nothing. That sort of brings together the whole idea. The world is perfect, it functions very well, and that's how it looks. That's how it looks. That's why it's 1613. Very similar if you compare it to some of the ancient texts, even from antiquity. The Earth is in the center, and then you have various spheres of the various planets, and then you have the sphere of stars, crystalline heaven, you have first mover and imperial heaven. Nothing has changed. I think of Clive Staples Lewis and his rejected image. Nothing has changed. No one is talking about Copernicus at this time. We may have a variation of this. That's a sort of compromise. The Earth goes around the sun, but all other planets go around the Earth. But they are able to explain the eclipse of the sun, of the moon, and things of this time. So yeah, those are quite nice, but sometimes they go to the extreme. I love this. Don't ask me to read the numbers. The earth and water making one only globe are in compass 21,600 miles. The diameter being 6,873, the semi-diameter and so on. The globe is in proportion to the whole world contained within the firmament as 1 to It is right here. It is right here. He wrote it. I have no idea where he got it from, but he wrote it. There's one almanac in which you have it, but you have it. But you have it. In general, those are the overall vision is that yes, you have this composition where you have the Earth in the center, various planets which move, and they describe the movements. There are various aspects of them. They have impact on Earth. They have impact on people. They have practical meaning. That's very important. They have practical meaning. This is a sort of addition, sort of a bit funny, but the general image is such. Yes, we live in a world which is governed by planets, which in turn are governed by God. Astra regunda homines. The stars rule people, but God rules the stars. This is right there. So I wouldn't be surprised if we could go back and see that, let's say, 30, 40% of the almanacs were purchased by doctors who really believed in this and wanted to calculate it somehow, because there are direct instructions here what to do about this. You have medical instruction here. What should be the aspects of planets to safely let blood, for example? 4 ways of curing people that they knew. One of them was bath. Heaven forbid, don't ever wash yourself. And instructions what you can do depending on who the person is. So you needed to calculate it so that you could apply the medicine you knew. At that time, I mean, Helen Kirsten in her work writes about how to produce some medicines, prescriptions, and so on. That is for 18th century. In this time, you don't have it yet. But you do have statements, and they repeat themselves one after another, of what can be cured in what phase of the moon, of what aspects of planets, and so on and so on. And the almanac is there to tell you that at this moment, Jupiter and Mars are positioned in such a way, okay, fine, you can put this person into water and wash him. This is a book, 17th century, one of the most popular pseudo-medical books, a huge number of copies, The Anatomy of Melancholy. For more specialized audience, like Burton's work, a little bit of everything and nothing to the end. A medical work summarizing the knowledge and so on. A normal peddler, you could say, or a doctor who was going from one village to another wouldn't read something like this. But he had an almanac, Alistry, 1623, of the 4 humors in man's body and certain physical observations. How to cure if someone is melancholy, if someone is else. What to do about this. There are exact details with tables. So it was living. I have a strong belief that it really functioned there, because if it wouldn't, why repeat it year after year? Why publish 400,000 copies of something that no one believes in? So you have about melancholy. The melancholic complexion. Melancholy is cold and very dry, as here is verse, and so on. What is also interesting is this is in the part of the almanac, and you have all types of complexions of planets, how they stand one against another, and so on. White in 1619 sums this up, a brief and necessary table showing what parts of the body are most subject to be diseased this year, 1619, by the signification of the planets in every sign. You have the planets, you have parts of the body, you have the signs of zodiac, and then you have description what can happen when and how can you treat this. And it's continued to the next page. I mean, I can imagine for someone who is pretending to be a doctor, who takes out this, looks, and it's deadly serious business. The patient died, well, God wanted this. There's always an explanation to something like this. But, I mean, it is right there, and this is for the small people. It's not for people at the universities or even, someone at Bishop's Court, like Burton's Melancholy, which is a huge, thick book, and there was probably, 1% of people in England at the time who were able to read it, and half of them would understand something of the book. But this is very simple. It sort of tells you exactly what you should do when you come to a village and you see this guy right there who is all pale or all red, and an explanation how to determine what is happening to the person depending on excrements and so on and so on. Yes, it's in the almanacs. It's in the almanacs. Something which is much closer to us, that's husbandry. It's also, you can say, yes, it's also astrology. But astrology which is based on the periods of the year, on month. And this is extremely useful because it really tells you what you should do in which month, in which part of the year. And an interesting story, funny, because you do find information sometimes more precise, sometimes less precise. This time of the year, it's April, you should cut trees. This time you should plant this and that, and so on. It tells you what you should do at home sometimes. When I was writing the dissertation, my grandmother was still alive, and I went and I told her what I'm doing. She was very interested and fascinated by this. And I told her, you know, this guy in 1620-something, I would have to check when was this written, wrote that you can cut children's hair only when the moon is in the third quarter. And she said, yes, that's right. I mean, she was almost 90 at that time, but that's the way that this functioned everywhere. And it sort of functions till today. But husbandry is, I read about medicine and I acknowledge the fact that they really took it seriously. And I know that it doesn't work this way. Sorry, it doesn't work this way. For husbandry, it's something different. It's much more closer to everyday life. And yes, there is a lot of information there which we could use today. So that's also very, very, very interesting and very sort of telling, because it tells us what people were planting, what they were trying to raise, what kind of fruits they were eating, and so on and so on. It's that there is real information about real people living out there. That's interesting also. An easy table for such as know not how to add, subtract to find the tides. Very practical, very practical. The second part of the booklet, prognostication, had all types of things. Information about medicine was practically in every almanac. About husbandry, the size varied. Information about the universe, that also varied. But you had additional things, like tides, which is extremely practical, if it was true, of course. If it was true. You had, I think, 2 or 3 of them had information about fairs in England and fairs in Europe and so on. Prognostications, elections according to the aspects of the moon and the planets. So you have the planets on the left. Then you have various aspects of them. And then it tells you, don't talk to your mother-in-law when the Mars is in such and such aspect with the moon. Very practical, very practical. I have no idea where they took it from, but it's right there. It's right there. So now the last thing, which is sort of something I'm thinking about and working right now, as I said, you get a beautiful vision of part of everyday life of England at that time. I say part because there's things which those almanacs don't touch, and I can guess that there are plenty of things which the authors did not even enter there because they were so normal, so natural, and let's face it, even they thought they didn't depend on the planets. But on top of this, you do have some information, for example, historical information, chronology of things. So some of those almanacs say it's an almanac for the year 1623, and then for the year 5900 something from the beginning of the world. And then it gives dates of various things. And I was surprised to find out that some things are simply not managed there and not mentioned there. Spanish Armada. Yes, there is information in practically every chronology of Queen Elizabeth meeting in Chile with people. Nothing about the Armada as such. 2 authors in the year 1603, 1640 mention the Armada. One of them writes about it being victorious. The other one just simply sums up the supplies they were collecting. And now I know a little bit more. Armada was not a success. It started being a success only in the 19th century. For them, it was not a success. It was not a success story, especially as the British fleet, which went to Spain afterwards, was defeated. So, like I say, I was a bit surprised about this, but yes, that's the way you learn about history. In the 17th century, Armada did not exist. It started existing in 1640 and 41 when they were writing about plots. This was one of the plots by the Catholics to overcome England, along with other plots by the Pope. Copernicus, I mentioned him already. Henrik Ziens, long time ago, published a book about the reception of Copernicus in England, and he went to Oxford and he studied some books. Maybe some people in Oxford accepted the ideas of Copernicus at that time. In the Almanacs, there's one author whom I remember, but I can't find out which one it is. I have a note somewhere at home, but I looked at it. But basically, even he writes that he thinks that there's something different about the world, and but he won't write it here. Obviously, he can't. So the theory of Copernicus is out. No one talks about it. But Copernicus, as I mentioned before, is mentioned as a good astronomer who has very good calculations, and those are used by them. Yes, he gets approval for this with others. No religion, nothing. What is not surprising, of course, and what was initially surprising for me is I knew a little bit about the Reformation and so on, but the almanacs, the majority of them, are constructed just like the Catholic ones. That means they have for every day the name of the saint who is for that day. I think it's tradition, I would say. It's the question of many people saying we have to meet not on the 3rd of March, but on St. Michael's Day, on this and that. So this traditionally stays there, but has a different function than in Catholic countries, where, of course, the days are celebrated. In Poland, some people, we celebrate birthday also, more and more often, but it's really the name day that is celebrated as the most important. But no religious debates at all. No, nothing. Current politics? No, they're not there. They're not there. So in other words, there are some things which are absent. Who knows, maybe one of these days I'll sit down, I'll switch on early English books online and see what happens after Restoration, what happens later on. And works were written articles about this, especially in the 18th century. This might have changed. There might have been a shift. I mean, there's less censorship. The church doesn't affect what is being printed in such a way. For this period, 1603, 1640, those things practically don't exist. And then a few slides from Poland, Prussian almanacs. And the Polish ones. As you can see, they don't differ that much. This is the one for 1532, so very early one. They don't differ that much from the English ones. Only, some of them written in Polish, but basically the ideas are exactly the same. When you read the merits of especially prognostication, you could translate it into English and put it into an English almanac. They're virtually the same. I think that up till maybe the end of 17th century, we have sort of similar type of publications throughout Europe, and then probably in the 18th century they tend to change. But like I say, it's still something to discuss with people who are doing this in other countries. For, like I say, Poland and England for the period of early Stuarts and for the Vasa period, there is practically no difference. Yes, it's in Polish and in English, but in terms of content, it's content which you could exchange between countries. So, and of course, in Poland, my guess is that the nobles purchased them probably, not the poorer ones. I was not able to determine whether any citizens purchased them, although this could be the case because some of them knew how to read and write, and they would be useful, for example, if you're trading, for example, international trade. You could put down in the almanac that you just sent, 3 carts with wine, eggs, fish, whatever, somewhere there. Well, it's either doesn't exist or is still to be discovered. So those are the samples of some Polish ones. And here we come to an end. Thank you very much.